I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with production designer Richard Bloom, who worked on Welcome to Chippendales alongside set decorator Lynette McCown. Richard, you said in the past that when you first signed on to Chippendales, you were curious about whether you really needed to adhere to, making sure that it was the same as the photos and all the other evidence that we can see, or whether you could just take creative license. So what does take creative license actually, or artistic license actually end up meaning for you?
Well, I think with a true life story, there's obviously so many real photos you can reference. And in terms of this, we knew we were going to be building the club, and both Rob Siegel and Jenny Connor, our showrunners, they wanted our club to work over our season. We were only going to build one, and we knew that we were taking place. The season was going to take place over 10 years, so we needed to build a set that not only would feel real, but also we could morph and have it change throughout the 10 years. So what I basically approached it, I did a ton of research, had a ton of real life things, and in every shot, I wanted it to feel like see something that actually you would have seen in real life had you been in the 80s in one of the clubs here in Culver City. But I knew that it also would need to be a little bit more dynamic. There was going to be a lot of scenes up in his office. And basically, this story with Steve is a man about money, and he is driven by money and greed and power. Whereas Nick's arch is, he's driven by his artistic license and his artistic vision. So, but knowing that Steve was all about money, where that safe is and where that office was, and we knew that was going to have a connection to the real club. So that's when early on, I knew I wanted to do a two-story club. And I knew that once you get inside of an office, a lot of times it can feel so cramped, but I wanted to keep that sort of magical element to this bizarre story. So the concept was to have the lights of the club, which started as a disco, always outside of that window of that office. So in one direction, you might see him against just wood paneling and a desk, but then the other direction you would see the hopes and dreams and the beautiful reflections, which I think Paula, our DP, captured so wonderfully throughout the whole series. She really took advantage of a lot of the glass and the reflections.
Yeah, I love the way Paula shot this series as well. Obviously working in tandem with you guys in the art department. I'm really interested in what you just said, because yes, you're going for period and it has to be authentic, but I felt like it was dialed up a little bit, and rightly so that it wasn't a drab office. There were little touches that I noticed that I really appreciated, and it really made me feel more immersed. I'm wondering then, when you're taking artistic license, which by the way must be such a gift for designers to be able to be like, okay, let's go for it. But totally. How far do you feel like you're able to dial it up a little without it becoming like ridiculous? And then, but then of course you don't want it to look drab and boring. So how is that balance? Is that difficult?
Yeah, actually, Lynette and we talked about that throughout the whole season. And one good example of that is as the story goes on and Nick and Steve becomes richer and richer, he's altered the club. He's added neon, he's added some colors, but really you see that his wealth is acquired when you see the house that he's moved into. He's moved into this giant house. And we knew we were going to do this portrait of them, right? And we had planned with that portrait to do it really huge. And then we read the pages, and there's these huge dramatic scenes between Irene and Steve where the relationship is falling apart, where it was going to be too comical to have them underneath this giant portrait of themselves, So there was a constant thing back and forth, and constantly talking to Rob and to Jenny about, we want to go this way in the next iteration of the club. And with all the merchandising, with all of the posters, with all of, we wanted to also tell the story of how it started so lame, and then it became much more slick as time went on. And the way we shot the series, we block shot it. So which means like every 2 episodes we had a new director. We had four directors, and luckily we were telling it correct within our timeline. So we weren't jumping from episode 1 to episode 7 and back and forth. But so we had a pretty even progression in terms of like, okay, now the neon's going in, now these colorful posters, now the backlit things are going in. You know, we tried to plot it out as best we could. We had one COVID problem on the show where we shut down, which did drive us to, in the middle of much later in the season, we had to go back to the original club with all the wood paneling and everything. We did that over a weekend, which was really stressful, but was also, you know, fun. It's what we do. So
oh my God, that is so stressful. Bloody COVID, it's always getting in the way.
It has, and I think it's going away finally. You know, I've been told on the project I just finished, they were like, this is your last COVID test, maybe forever. I don't think we're gonna have to.
Like, don't you have enough pressure and stress to make sure that it's all working, and then you've got to strip it back for a week and then put it back again? Totally. I'm sorry, man, but that's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. And we only had one huge stage in Chatsworth where the club was on one, like half of the stage. And then the other part of the stage, we were constantly just putting up sets and bringing them down and building more sets. And so that would always be a scare if we had a COVID hiccup where we were like, oh gosh, we literally need the space to put up the next set. So we're gonna have to fold and hold the set and then put it up later. And so there was a lot of this back and forth. And towards the end of the season, you know, we were also trying to reuse walls and reuse as much as we could to economize the season.
That's crazy. So the Chippendales Club obviously was constructed on a stage. What led to that decision? Was there any chance that you could have found a location that you could have maybe adapted?
You know, we actually found the location that we ended up using for the exterior after we'd already started building. We knew that with the extra count that we had and with COVID happening, it was just going to be much more, and the page count that was going to be in the club, it was just going to be much more cost effective to have it there, and also safer. So we were in the height of COVID, so they were having to clear out the club every once in a while, open up walls and bring in, you know, fans and that kind of thing. It was really surreal because our office was perched like on a second floor office, and we had a stage access. And so you'd be up there in the office working on the next episode, and all of a sudden you'd hear this eruption of 200, you know, extras screaming at the guys as they were doing the dance. So it was sort of like living in a nightclub for, you know, 6 months, which was really fun and festive, but that also made it tricky because we would be literally building a set next to it while the club was going on. So it was a logistical puzzle for sure.
Yeah, puzzle's good. I like that. That's a better one. So you've worked with Lynette McCown a few before. What do you most value about that collaboration?
Well, she is her eye. I mean, there's like uncomparable. You know, we had just gotten back when I first booked this show. We had just gotten back from Prague. We had been working in Prague for a few months on another project, and had done a really grueling television show prior to this. And I got to say, she really she and her whole team really understand character. They drive everything from character. You know, there's little details that I wish all the viewers could go and see the sets, because you see them, but you don't really see how detailed they are. Every drawer is full, every little thing. In fact, Murray Bartlett's character Nick, you know, he in real life that real man had won an Emmy for Unicorn Tales, which is and that's all true. Yeah, that's all true.
Yeah.
And Lynette had found this beautiful brass unicorn that we then took from his apartment to his office in New York to his fancier office in New York. And then ultimately when the show wrapped, Murray came up to us and was like, that's the one thing I want to take from the show is the little unicorn. So, and I think it's those kind of things that also, Lynette's very attentive to the actors. So, you know, Kumail had early on, to get into his character, he had sent us a list of things that maybe we could have around his first apartment, the one where he's dreaming of Playboy and the Rolexes. And she's just amazing that way. And also period wise, she just really gets the period. There's no task too small. It's
yeah. I love when set decorators can explain their process, because it's their job to like enhance and to make the set feel a bit lived in and not so artificial, I suppose, if that's a right word. And I love the way this show really captures the period. And I'm now curious, apart from looking at photos and of course your own knowledge of the period, because it goes from like late 70s to pretty much almost late 80s. So it is a span of different periods. What other inspirations were you taking on board to design all the different sets on the show?
We were definitely looking at, at the beginning, we were looking at a lot of 1970s films in terms of the way they shot more, theatrical elements. And with Paula, she and I had talked about sort of the evolution of the lighting and the color with the light. Obviously in a television show too, some of that stuff gets away from you. Like you can have the tightest palette ever, but then ultimately you get into the mechanics of it, and you know that this half-page scene and this half-page scene are going to have to be shot together. So you might pick a location for one, and then the location you're forced into on the next one will be less than perfect, But in fact, a little side note, like on the Donahue day, the Donahue set, we had a perfect location that looked just like the Donahue set. And then at the last minute, we were told we couldn't film there because of the men taking off their shirt and dancing. It was actually a church. And they didn't realize quite the subject matter. And so then we scrambled, we moved the schedule around, and we ended up at a place that worked totally well, but it was not my first choice. It was like way down the list. And so then Lynette, of course, has to save the day, which is always the set decorator thing. You walk into a location that is less than perfect, and all the lighting has to change. There's all sorts of non-period things everywhere. And it's usually up to set deck for us to figure out the solution to how we're going to manage that,
That's
often prep too. So it's a wild journey in television. It really is it's like you're running a marathon, but you're sprinting the whole way. So
yeah, you are sprinting for months.
Yeah,
and then you get a few hurdles that you
there's a lot of curveballs. Yeah, there's a lot of hurdles.
Yeah, it's crazy. So thinking about how the series recreates this really specific and recognizable era, and by the way, I say recognizable because we're not talking about the 1800s, we're talking about an era that most of us remember or have seen on TV 1,000 times. So the carpets, the wood paneling, the furniture, the cars, those little accoutrements that you include on the sets, were there any in particular that you found difficult or challenging, or that surprised you, given that your experience on this particular project?
Yeah, from the very beginning, you put together sort of an idea of what you feel like the look of the show. And then I had some amazing assistant art directors and art directors who were constantly out doing that. They were sourcing the carpets and sourcing that, and they were coming back, and we were pulling the trigger on wallpapers. And some of the things you have enough lead time, about a set long enough where you really think it through. And then as it goes on, some of the things emerge. Like with Nick in particular, I wanted him to be in a mid-century place in Los Angeles, which are so iconic. We found this great exterior, and then we built the set on stage for his interior of his apartment. And then I knew that as he was moving to New York, I wanted him to realize that even, a man of the 80s going into the 80s, he is still a little dated because he meets this younger man, but and the theatricalness of it all. So we wanted to go into more of like an art deco and then into an 80s deco kind of vibe. So you'll see like in the hotel that he first stays in, where he first meets Andrew Reynolds' character, we were trying to be inspired by some deco, some high-end deco things. And then similarly, we were trying to bring that into the stage space and his sort of like through line throughout. And that kind of emerged as we went forward. And also sometimes, also set dressing will come back in. They do boards for each of the sets that we present to the showrunners, and sometimes they find stuff that is just so perfect, but it's not right for that set. So we're like, okay, we're going to save that sofa. We're going to find a place for that sofa somewhere, and those are the kind of things that we really enjoy doing. It could even be a fabric. Like there's these pillows that are in Nick's apartment that we actually had made that Lynette had found this great vintage fabric, and they're mixed in with some pillows, I think from even like CB2, because you're renting things, you're finding things that are modern that feel old, and then you're also trying to mix in some real special pieces. And so, that whole journey is kind of what makes the show. And once you kind of have that language of the show, there are certain things that I think it becomes easier, and you can make the decisions quicker.
Yeah. What about the mobile gas station? Was that an adaptation of an old location somewhere, or did you have to work on it to make it look a bit older?
That was really, really tricky to find, I'll be honest. Our locations department on this killed it. Because most gas stations that you find are on really busy streets that you are not conducive to filming on, and they have modern gas swipes and whatever. So we talked about a bunch of different ways of doing it. We were going to find an empty building. You can rent gas pumps. Right. At one point we were going to rent gas pumps and build out a situation. But then they found this gas station that still had the old pumps. And so I was like, that also had the convenience store. It's like, we can make this work. So the gas station was really great in letting us sort of empty out the whole place, repaint. And it was pretty down. And so far it was a little down in the way that the showrunners were like, are you sure this is going to look okay? And I was like, I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be a good way to see where he's coming from. But yeah, that one took a really long time. It had me nervous for a while.
I can only imagine.
And I think we had a 2-day install there too. So it was like all the departments were on top of each other trying to like panel and paint and pull all the stuff out and then put all the new stuff in. But it did have that great case already. Yeah. So it had a lot of elements that I was like, this is going to be great.
But you can amplify.
Yeah. But then across the street from it, in the very first shot, when you see across the street, there's this giant mural and some neon and whatnot. That was actually a bunch of storefronts. We built a giant flat that went over that whole block and then did that mural just so, because we couldn't have all these shots be visual effects shots. So so that's one of the things when you're looking, especially with a period piece, you're thinking not just about space, you're thinking about like, okay, well, when the DP gets here and they want to do coverage and turn the camera around, they're going to hate me because they're going to be boxed in. They're only going to have 2 angles or whatever. Right. And that was like a location where I really felt like they had pretty much a 360 playground without too many little visual effects things that had to be taken away.
Yeah, because it's so typical for production designing that a lot of the sets sometimes just has to be built out by VFX.
Yeah.
But it's so, I mean, I've always heard this, that it's just always better to rely on in-camera if you can. And it looks like so much of that you guys were able to achieve. My final question, Richard, is this. I don't know if you hear this very often, but when I'm watching a show like this, honestly, because I'm so immersed in the story, I assume that you just found this club and that you're just at some old apartment when Nick's dancing around with his handkerchief, because it just feels so real to me. And I just wonder, are you in two minds about you want your work to be noticed and you want people to, give you guys credit for all the work you've done, but on the other hand, the audience just thinks this is so real. Maybe they just found it and shot it in a day.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's the hope. I have, when I watch shows, and obviously I watch them with a different lens, I often get pulled out if the wallpaper's too loud and the signage is too obviously. So I'm always trying to kind of sneak up on it. So it does feel like it's visual and there's something special to look at, but also it's not necessarily screaming at you like, hey, look at me, I'm so 1979, So I think that was our hope, and that's what we were aiming for, And I think, the DP is obviously so important for us to have that dialogue, so we can all be on the same page as we create the look of the show. I think Paula did it. She did a great job.
She really did. Richard, congratulations on some beautiful.
Thanks so much.
And thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This is great.